I've been thinking a lot about resiliency, sort of in light of, was it CrowdStrike? Is that what Microsoft, the bug that took down the US economy for a few days? And just thinking, and then we learned this lesson during COVID too, about the brittleness of our supply chains, and just that in the name of efficiency and cost reduction, we've created really brittle systems. So, and redundancy is actually quite useful for resiliency. And so I was sort of thinking about that in the context of this conversation, and what does that mean? What does redundancy mean in the context of workforce growth and resiliency? And I think our panelists have some interesting comments, like kind of on that theme. So if you think about the video that we just saw from Coalfield Development, the worker said, I can weld, I can farm, I can operate an excavator. Like this broad, comprehensive set of skills actually prepares workers, helps worker resiliency, right? And helps kind of support workers, this broad occupational training. Or another way to think about it is one of the precepts of, I think, the IWG's work, looking at economic diversification, and that as we're looking at the loss or retirement of coal operations or power plants, it's very difficult or maybe impossible to find a one-for-one replacement. And a lot of the work that a lot of the people in this room are doing are to look at how to diversify the local economy. And so I think there's different ways to think about resilience in the context of this workforce conversation. And what I want to do is really start with some really concrete examples that the folks on this panel, who all represent workers in different labor unions, some really concrete examples, and then from the specific sort of illuminate maybe more general trends or ideas or things that the IWG can help support. So on our panel today, we have Clemmy, who represents the training organization of the United Mine Workers. We have Ashlee, who represents the United Steelworkers. And we have Matthew, who represents the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And they all have really, I think, different approaches and interesting experience thinking about worker retention, worker transition, upskilling, retraining, et cetera. So I want to just start, I think, down with Clemmy and ask, what have you guys, what has been some of your experience? You're dealing with communities that have already seen a lot of closures, that you already have displaced workers, and you've been preparing and figuring out how to respond and react and retrain folks. So I think it would be interesting to hear more of the specifics about those efforts.
Well, I was glad that the slides were up there. It showed the red spots, the red blob in West Virginia and Appalachia. And it's a hollowed out part of this country. And I have to say this, that it's encouraging to hear all of these different groups that are involved in one way or another trying to make this right. And this interagency working group is, I mean, if somebody didn't make it up, it had to be invented to try to pull all these resources together. We've been doing unemployed workers since 1996. And I serve as the special coordinator to the president of the Mine Workers, Cecil Roberts. And since '96, I've been working with the UMWA Career Centers, trying to find jobs for dislocated workers and their families. And we went through a whole cycle. Mining, by definition, by its very nature, the day you start mining coal is the day you work until the end of closing that mine. And that's just that, it's that simple. And so mining always, in these rural mining communities of Appalachia, have always been cyclical. It's boom or bust, feast or famine, whatever. And for most of the time, if people got laid off at a mine, they always knew in the back of their head that mine was going to open back up. And that's why they didn't leave, that's why they stayed. And that was pretty much true till about 2012. And we saw it with the natural gas industry coming in and basically taking over the energy needs of a lot of the previous coal-fired power plants. And so there was not going to be a resurgence of the industry because of the replacement by natural gas. And a lot of the folks weren't ready for that. You know, we had talked about it. We seen it coming. You know, didn't have a crystal ball or nothing, but people in the industry that we knew that were supplying coal to these coal-fired power plants told us they're never coming back. That's industry people saying that. They're never coming back. We saw that. So we've been, for 30-some years, we've been training people for jobs outside of the coal industry. And we've worked, we haven't done as some of the stuff that a lot of these folks in here have done, but we've worked with different companies to try to determine what type of people they want, what type of workers they're looking for. And we've tried to focus on job demands in those areas to get those people trained. We've also worked on our own, I shouldn't say on our own, partnering with other people to come up with some other ideas about creating jobs and training people for those jobs. Batteries is one of them. And we're working with Nettle. There's some Nettle people here, I'm sure, somewhere. And so we're trying to do that. The other thing that we're working on is capping gas wells, abandoned gas wells. And we're working with the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO, and we're working with the Secretary, Susan Shirley of DEP in Pennsylvania, and Kathy Walker, head of labor and industry, and we've developed an apprenticeship program for capping abandoned mine lands, or gas wells. And as soon as they can get a quorum with the Apprenticeship Board of Pennsylvania, we're going to make the application and try to get that thing done. And then what we'd like to do is we're going to start training people in these rural mining communities to do that particular job. Pennsylvania, right now, they're focusing on 20,000 abandoned gas wells. But there's people that figure there might be 200,000 or more that are in there. So if we get this thing cranked up and get it going, that's going to provide a lot of jobs. And I got to throw this in because everybody's been talking about it. You get around these mining communities in Appalachia, and I like to use this, the travel in Appalachia is circuitous. Come on. You can't get there from here. You got the mountains, you've got the rivers, you got the bridges, you got all that stuff. So try to get somebody to go to school and not help them with that travel. That's a barrier, that's a challenge. One of the things that I'd like to talk about and see folks talk about is wage replacement for people who want to go to school. We did that early on, back in 30 years ago. They called them needs-related payments in, but that became nobody wanted to use that word anymore, so we're saying wage replacement. But that is one of the keys to get people to retrain for another job.
You also, you had mentioned earlier when we were talking about cybersecurity
Oh,
training
yeah.
and looking at new occupations and new industries and how to prepare workers for those.
We have a training center in Greene County, Pennsylvania, right next to the West Virginia border. And it's all been grant funded through the states or through the federal government. And one of the things we have there, because we're focusing on working with the robotics hub in Pittsburgh, is mechatronics. And we were very, very fortunate. The state of Pennsylvania gave us money to build a mechatronics laboratory. And we're training young people now to learn that job, and then they'll move on. The next step will be moving on into robotics. But there's a couple companies we're working with, Washington Penn Plastic and a company called Perriman in Coal Center, Pennsylvania. They're hiring our people as soon as they finish their training. They're hiring them. They're putting them to work. And we feel really good about that. And we have a CDL course down there, and you can't swing a dead skunk without seeing a sign that says CDL driver wanted, for something. And we're working on the cybersecurity. One of the key elements of cybersecurity is having high-speed internet to do that. And if you get up around some of these areas, you hear people talk about it all the time. We've got money for high-speed internet, whatever. I don't know where it is, but it's not there just yet. But that's one of the things that you could train for cybersecurity. A lot of banks and whatever, there's like 12, 13 different levels of security. And so you can start people out and they keep, they come back and get, more credits, more credits, more credits. But that's something to work. We have a cyber lab there at Rough Creek, along with the mechatronics lab. So,
yeah. So you're not trying, and you've been doing this for a generation. Not you personally, but mine.
I'm old.
28
I'll say
years.
it. I'm old.
1996 to 2024. That's 28 years, if my math is right. So you're not just looking at retraining energy workers for other energy jobs. You're really looking at broad opportunities in other industries and other occupations.
This, the mechatronics thing just kind of came up, and a lot of people goes, what's mechatronics? And then the gas wall camping thing just seemed to happen. But we've, incumbent workers and dislocated workers, we've trained 20-some-odd thousand of them that went on to get jobs. And we just didn't train, no offense to anybody, we just didn't train them for another job. We trained them for family sustaining wages with benefits, because that's what they're used to. So that's one of the things we focus on. Yeah.
So on that theme, and I'll get back to you, Ashlee, but I want to jump to Matthew. Matthew represents workers at IBEW, and you can tell us what industries you represent, at least in the context of this conversation. But you guys are really, you're really focused on worker retention. Just tell us about how you're thinking about the transition planning for energy workers that you represent.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate all the comments that Clemmy just made about some of the ways that they're looking at kind of diversifying their workforce and thinking outside of the box. For us, I guess we're in a little bit different of a situation because we represent the workers at the coal-fired power plants that are owned by investor-owned utilities, municipals, co-ops, et cetera. And so we're able to, in the context of retention or transitioning for those workforces, is engaging early on with that utility to kind of discuss the transition of that workforce, either through collective bargaining agreement, maybe that plant is going to be retrofitted for natural gas, but we're also leaning into things a little bit differently, especially there's been a lot of discussions about siting for, brownfield sites, coal communities for advanced nuclear technologies. I know that was something that came up earlier during our breakout session. But that's kind of what we're leaning into, and we're leaning in and engaging our membership now to kind of help them understand the potential that would offer that workforce as they're transitioning. And one of the projects that we're kind of, I guess you say, standing in support of is the Kimmer, Wyoming TerraPower project. Naughton is the coal-fired power plant that they're looking at building a advanced reactor, molten salt reactor adjacent to it. So we're kind of leaning in and hopefully being able to use that as a boilerplate product to kind of apply broaden across. There was a recent study that was done back in May that cited 245 coal power plants, as like categorizing them, their suitability for advanced nuclear or other types of technologies. So that's generally what we're working on, is trying to talk about what's coming next, provide that opportunity, feeding it to our members at the ground level to kind of help them negotiate with the utility like other types of technologies or classifications that they could go into.
To avoid displacement or avoid the layoffs, but rather retrain workers within the same sector or the same employer.
Absolutely, because I think somebody made a point earlier about the communities being disadvantaged, thinking about, the people secondary, but the community as a whole, because, facilitating our discussion, a lot of times it's not just the worker themselves that's disadvantaged by that transition, but also somebody that may work in a shared service in that community as well, bank, teacher, firefighter, et cetera.
Matthew, do you have any specific examples of, you mentioned the nuclear facility in Wyoming, but do you have other specific examples of where your work with utilities has led to the retention of jobs through the transition of shuttered plants?
Yeah, so like I said early on, we engage with the investor-owned utilities to kind of help them. A lot of them have announced transition plans away from carbon-emitting sources by some random number in the future. And we kind of evaluate going forward, what is a possibility for us to do? What does their energy portfolio look like going on in the forward, and how can we slot our individuals in there? And one example that we've been working really closely with is Xcel Energy, and as they kind of get away from their carbon emitting sources, announcing some of the closures of their plants, this created an opportunity for us to work with them on their renewables package, in that space, wind and solar, to help transition those displaced workers into those areas.
And that's worked.
Absolutely, and one of the things that they've committed to is that making sure that anyone, especially at these power plants that close, anyone who wants a job will have a job within, that'll pay decently, comparable to what they were making at the power plant.
That's incredible. And Ashlee, tell us a little bit about the part of the energy sector that the Steelworkers represent, and also any success stories, examples of what your approach is in this energy transition.
Yeah, thank you. So even though with the name with United Steelworkers, we have a varied membership, primarily here, we're talking about some of our oil and gas workers, as well as I want to reference some of our nuclear cleanup workers. So looking at our success stories, and I just kind of want to preface this, that our approach to really a lot of our initiatives across the union is how can we work within communities? Like, we have everyone here that, and one, I appreciate this conversation as a West Virginian, the amount of attention and recognition that's in this room. I really appreciate that. But we have all these expertise, so how can we convene just like this group together to help achieve our goal? So we're sitting here talking a lot about workforce development, and then talking about how we're going to transition to good jobs, but we have the unions can put at the end of that. So we have training. Now what does that good job looks like 10 years down the road? So we come in to help make sure that the workers that are trained, whether by Clemmy or the other groups in this room, get that life-sustaining, good, safe job in the future, not just at hire, but for years to come. And we believe that this collaboration continues to allow us to do that. And looking at workforce development, we utilize that same collaboration. I use the term, we have lane assist. There's tons of resources, so how can we each stay in our lane and help move this forward? And the prime example I have to share with that is within one of our EM, Emergency Management DOE cleanup communities, where there is this transition about a vast growth in this area, whether it's a small modular reactor or a lot of reindustrialization in this small town in Ohio. And how can we prepare workers now for the transition in the future? And, adjacently in California, looking at our oil and gas workers, of how we can prepare them now for the transition into other energy for the future. And leans a lot on the dislocated worker program that a lot of you are familiar with. However, in California, there's the change that you don't have to have a WARN notice to get those benefits. So when we look at the fundamental WIOA Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act credits for workers, this actually allows people to go ahead and seek those resources before they're actually displaced. Now, someone mentioned the challenge, right, about training while you're working, and that's something that each individual has a specific example that we have to overcome, but still without the ability for workers to do that like we can do now in California. We can't even begin to have those conversations. So for some good examples and kind of how we approach it, really looking at how we can preemptively do this training to help them get better jobs or continue to be employed.
And what kind of training are you talking about? What you're talking about, upskilling the existing workforce and looking ahead and preparing workers for what might be coming. Do you have examples?
Yep. So specifically in like the upskilling realm, in a lot of our manufacturing facilities, we do see an integration of new technology, and a lot of the craft workers, maintenance electricians need upskilled, whether it's through mechatronics programs or robotics programs. And a lot of our average age of our worker can be 53 years old, and the way we made steel 28 years ago is not the same way you make steel today, and that's probably the same for a lot of industries. So partnering with community colleges and getting that advanced upskilling, so whenever there is an implementation of new technology, that our workers are ready and already trained. And then as far as like the varied training opportunities for potentially dislocated workers, there's a lot of concentration on funds available for apprenticeship programs. And, we recognize that as a pathway. However, just as it's been discussed here today, you have to have a varied approach to allow communities to adapt to this change. We believe the same thing is true with workforce development programs. It can't just be one pathway that allows workers into these jobs. We have to look at a varied multi-pronged approach to give people the skills to either continue to have their job or be able to find a new one.
As we're talking about skills and retraining and upskilling and looking at other, transitioning workers from one technology maybe to another, what do you think are the most relevant skills of the workers employed today, or in your case in the mines, that are transferable to the industries and jobs that are coming? Where is that? How much overlap is there, and how much retraining is required?
There's a lot. I used to be a steel worker, by the way. Anyway,
We'll still take you.
the master electricians, underground mines, I mean, they could go almost anywhere. They have if they keep their federal license, they could almost go anywhere and do that work. Diesel mechanics, almost anywhere. Running the heavy equipment. I mean, some of those things, they're like prehistoric. I mean, they're just huge. And a lot of those folks could go head out, very little training. They can run a D9, they can run an excavator, so on. So there's a lot of skills are transferable, and they're easy to transfer, quite frankly, so.
I'd jump in real quick, because one of the, outside of being like licensed in anything, I would think like the industrial safety knowledge that these people have is pretty invaluable. Transferable into other industries where they can be more critical of how workers can be injured on the job, like in industrial accidents that may happen in communities. Because the training that they've received over the course of their lifetime is not something that's taught readily, because most people aren't going into industries that they don't see surviving. So I think that that's one valuable asset that these folks can carry on to the next generation.
And I would just, broadly about our workers and, specifically in manufacturing, that we take great pride in our work, right? We say we build America by America. And I think with that amount of passion, and we talk a lot about loyalty, and I could sit here and say that workers are loyal to being able to produce and provide for their family. So with that type of strength and dedication that, I think they'll go anywhere, but it's our responsibility to make sure that it's a good, life-sustaining, safe job for them to continue to do so.
My former colleague, who some of you might know, she worked a lot on the IWG, Kate Gordon, would talk a lot about asset mapping for these communities in order to attract new investment. And I'm curious, like hearing about the broad transferability of these skills, has anybody, this is a question for you, but also in the room, has anybody done that asset mapping, looking at the workforce and the skills as a way of highlighting that for companies that are looking to locate?
We did for an aerospace, actually, project, because we found metal fabrication, we found DC power, we found pneumatics, we found so many transferable skills directly from one cluster to another that we could use for a certification for aerospace and for attraction of aerospace into a community that had displaced coal miners.
And did it work?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do any of you have examples of that where you've really kind of leveraged the skills that you and your members bring to help attract new employers?
I think one of the main things that these dislocated workers, not just in coal mines, I said I'm a steel worker, and you can't get a better workforce anywhere than you could get out throughout Appalachia. You can't. That's a workforce ready. I mean, they're ready to go to work. They know how to get to work, and they know how to work hard whenever they get there. And I think that's one of the biggest assets. And I think a lot of people, a lot of these companies, once they understand that, then they start hiring them. When we first started back in the late 90s, companies wouldn't come by to UMWA. There's ain't no way we're hiring those guys and bringing them in here. That's not happening. But the people that did hire them, and when they did start working, they came back to us. I'm not making this up. They come back to us and said, do you have other folks? Because those guys would work hard. Those men and women that worked underground in those mines, when they got a job somewhere else, they did a great job.
And I would just add to the conversation, we run our programs, our worker trainer programs first and foremost. That means it's built off of a peer trainer model. Even our workforce development, who better to train an electrician than an electrician? And specifically in one of our programs that deals with radiological safety, it's called a radiological control technician. We use those senior level RCTs acronym to train the juniors. And throughout our programs, we've had the employers come back to us say, we want people from your program. We don't want them from the community college program, because there's the conduct of operations. There's the ethos on the site that they gain from being through your programs that they don't gain from somebody who doesn't work at that site. So I would just add that I think that's a real strength that our programs bring to the table and our workers bring to the table, because they want to see it succeed and they want their communities to succeed along with the program. So with that type of community buy-in and involvement, I think they're bound to succeed when everyone's working collaboratively to make that happen.
Do you want to add anything, or?
I don't have anything that I could possibly add. I think.
Well, I wanted to. I mean, hearing about these assets that the labor unions bring, and the importance of collaboration to serve these communities and to grow jobs and to revitalize the local economies. What are additional? You talked about some of the training assets that you provide and the ethos and the loyalty of workers, but what are some? Why should folks work with labor unions in this space? What do you bring? What can you, how are you engaging with the interagency working group, and how can we foster stronger and tighter partnerships with organized labor broadly?
I go back to the type of workers that you end up with. I mean, whether it's in a power plant, or whether it's in a steel mill or a coke yard or whatever, they're just hard workers. And the fact that they belong to a union that gave them some self-determination in the workplace, that's fine. All I know is our experiences, just like with there's two companies. One's Washington Penn Plastics Steelworker, represent them, and I don't believe Perriman's representing by anybody. They're non-signatory. But they're taking our people right off of the floor out of the mechatronics lab and putting them to work. That's not bothering them. So.
Matt, yeah, you talked about like research and planning. Like, what are the other ways in which IBEW is engaging in these broader economic redevelopment collaborative efforts? And
I think it's
how could
trying to understand what is the vision, direction, and strategy for some of these like investor-owned utilities or even like the new technologies that are emerging. I think like when it comes to like the type of benefit that working with labor organization is really just partnership. The level of advocacy that we can get, we've got a ton of people down on the ground, and if there's a particular brand message that we want to share and we can get behind it 100%, we feed it to the group and it kind of assist with some of that transition. But I think if anything, it has to do a lot with advocacy.
Ashlee, would you add anything? No?
I'll take Matt's line. I have nothing to add.
I'm just thinking about how in the last few minutes, and then we have a couple minutes in case there's any other discussions. But just how do you envision, or what could the interagency working group do to better support coordination and collaboration with organized labor? What do you think could be useful going forward in terms of plans or tools or research or analysis or what have you to support worker resilience and job growth in energy communities?
Are you looking at me?
I'm looking at, well, Ashlee
Me, I'll go first.
Yeah.
So I think there are a couple of things. One, it's exciting to hear about the AmeriCorps and how that deployment's going to happen. However, right, the unions have strong resources in the community and ties. For many places, we've been, chartered in that location for 50, 60, 70 years. So ensuring that there's going to be some type of communication, whether it's through the, that team, the rapid response team, and at least having some understanding. I think, on behalf of all labor unions, we'd be more than happy to reach out to the rapid response and let them know about our resources and our challenges, because sometimes we're the best people to get in touch with our members and know that this is a good, safe transition to take part of. Also, about having some consolidated resources available for workers that we can help, be educated on ourselves and then help educate our members on. Because without that type of, collaboration, I guess going back to partnership, right? Having that partnership so that our members, potentially dislocated workers and communities get the resources that they need.
That gentleman earlier from AmeriCorps, I think that is one of the most important things. You have to have people down on the ground. You got to have people down there to see what's going on. What is it? What do they? We got ideas. We all got ideas about what we think is needed, but you got to be down on the ground. The labor unions, for the most part, they're there. They're there working with these communities, trying to help do something to them. And there's obviously a lot of resources out here. You hear people talking all day about the stuff. We just got to coordinate it. And I think you got to have folks knowing what it is you need. What do you need?
Right. So stronger partnerships, the resources for more capacity on the ground. Anything else that you would add?
Transparency. I think sharing of information is valuable. A lot of these studies that come out that talk about the ways that we can use, brownfield sites or energy communities or repurposing, these areas. All of the considerations that go into that, the discussions about, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, because I'm the nuclear guy for my organization, is the transferability of classifications from either natural gas or coal generation into nuclear. And so identifying the gap analysis that's needed so that when you do engage with stakeholder groups that are like education affiliated or higher learning organizations, to kind of help them understand the needs of the workers going forward is of most use. And probably one of the biggest questions that I get from our members that work in coal communities is what does that training look like? What does that upskilling look like? And that's something that's still being taken under the way.
Are there any questions any burning questions from the room to ask before we wrap up?
Oh,
Yes.
Tom Croft.
I just wanted to shout out to some of the comments that all of our labor brothers and sisters talked about. One, I wanted to shout out and support some of the comments from our labor brothers and sisters. So I think that the concept of conversion, of industrial conversion, the brother from IBEW talked about, is a very little used concept in economic development. My organization in Pennsylvania has been managing an industrial retention program, layoff aversion program for 30-something years, 40 years almost, and we've saved around 35,000 industrial jobs over those years through financial restructuring, industrial restructuring, buyouts, so those kinds of things. But the economic development field does not understand or use things like early warning, things like industrial retention strategies, and shame on us because there's thousands of more jobs that could have been saved across the country if we had. The other thing that Betony Jones, when you're someday the Secretary of Department of Energy, and you'll have the next president's ear, I think the idea of wage replacement is just such an essential idea that we've also, as a society, have blown off, thinking, all the way back to the ideas of the Clinton administration that we don't really need manufacturing jobs. People will be able to transfer to high-tech jobs, and the other countries can take care of our dirty jobs for us. That was wrong then, it's wrong now. Wage replacement, which other countries in Europe have been using for 50 years, is one way to make sure that people don't die while they're waiting to train to find new jobs, and there's a way for them to survive and maintain their family, so they don't have to get up and leave. So anyway, thank you for that great conversation.
Thank you for the kind of wrap-up remarks, Tom. I think, and like the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Like thinking about, well, first of all, planning is better than triage after the fact. So planning when you know a closure is coming, negotiating retention with the employer, thinking about funding for wage replacement or retraining, like all of that is easier before you're in a crisis. Right. And so I think that's something really important, not just thinking about strategies for displaced workers, but avoiding worker displacement in the first place. And there's a lot of strategies. And one of the things I think that the IWG is well situated to do is just to document what some of those best practices are and share that information out. So thank you all today for providing some really concrete examples of what works. It's really useful. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Betony.